You are training harder than everyone else. More sets, more exercises, more days per week, and your gains have stopped. Not because you are not working hard enough, because you are working too hard. This is the muscle growth trap, and most people fall straight into it without realizing it. Here is what happens when volume crosses the line from productive to destructive. The relationship between training volume and muscle growth is not linear. It is not a case of more equals better. Recent meta-analysis of over 60 studies involving more than 2,000 participants confirmed what mechanistic research has been showing for years. Volume and hypertrophy follow a curve of diminishing returns. Early sets produce the highest growth per unit of effort. Each additional set beyond a certain threshold produces progressively smaller gains, while accumulating progressively more fatigue. The model that best fits the data is a square root function. What that means in practical terms is this. The volume required to push from moderate gains to maximal gains is more than 3 times the volume required to go from 0 to moderate gains. You are not getting 3 times the results. You are getting marginally more muscle at a dramatically higher cost. This is the foundation of the trap. But the cost is not just time spent in the gym. The cost is systemic. And this is where most people miss what is happening. Every set you perform creates localized muscle damage and triggers an anabolic signaling cascade. That cascade, driven primarily by mTOR activation, tells your muscles to synthesize new protein and grow. mTOR is the master regulator of muscle protein synthesis. When you lift, mechanical tension activates mTOR. mTOR then signals ribosomes to start building new muscle proteins. This is the growth signal everyone is chasing, but here is what most people miss. That same training session also creates systemic fatigue. Your central nervous system takes a hit. Your endocrine system responds by elevating cortisol. Your immune function temporarily dips. Your glycogen stores deplete. All of this is manageable and even necessary for adaptation when volume is appropriate. But when volume becomes excessive, the fatigue accumulates faster than you can recover from it. This is where the stimulus to fatigue ratio collapses. Each additional set beyond your effective threshold is contributing less anabolic stimulus while adding more systemic fatigue. You are spending resources, energy, recovery capacity, hormonal balance for minimal return. At a certain point, the ratio inverts. You are now training in a way that actively impairs your ability to grow. You are creating an environment hostile to growth. And here is the part that surprises people, and it is backed by both animal and human data. Excessive volume does not just add fatigue, it can actually blunt the anabolic signal itself. Research in rat models using electrically stimulated muscle contractions found that muscle protein synthesis plateaued after a certain number of sets, even though markers of mTOR activation continued to rise. The signaling was there. The phosphorylation of downstream targets like P70S6K was elevated. But the downstream response, actual protein being built, flatlined. This suggests that beyond a certain dose, additional volume stops translating into additional growth, even at the molecular level. The machinery is firing, but the output has capped. In humans, the picture is similar. Muscle protein synthesis rates peak within the first few sets of an exercise. Additional sets do not elevate protein synthesis further. They just extend the duration of the elevated state. But that extension comes at a cost. Prolonged muscle damage, longer recovery windows, and greater systemic stress. You are borrowing against future sessions to fund marginal gains today, and that trade-off rarely pays. You end up in a state where every session digs you deeper into a recovery deficit that you never fully climb out of. Now let's talk about what excessive volume does to your ability to recover between sessions. Overreaching is a term used to describe short-term performance drops caused by an accumulation of training stress. When managed correctly with planned recovery, it can lead to supercompensation and improved performance. This is functional overreaching. It is intentional, brief, and followed by deload periods. But when overreaching is prolonged or combined with insufficient recovery, it progresses into non-functional overreaching or even overtraining syndrome. At this stage, systemic inflammation becomes chronic. Cortisol dysregulation occurs. Immune function declines. Cognitive performance drops. Sleep quality deteriorates. Your body is no longer adapting. It is defending itself against what it perceives as a sustained threat. The distinction between productive training and overtraining is not always obvious until you have crossed the line. Research on endurance athletes shows that those in a state of overtraining exhibit higher baseline levels of oxidative stress, blunted hormonal responses to training, and reduced muscle glycogen stores even at rest. The body is in a state of chronic energy deficiency and systemic inflammation. Growth is not just stalled, the environment is actively hostile to it. Muscle protein breakdown increases. Protein synthesis is suppressed. Testosterone drops. Cortisol stays elevated. You are catabolic, not anabolic. And this does not just affect your muscles. Overtraining impacts the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, the system that governs your stress response. When this system is overtaxed, your ability to handle any form of stress, training, or otherwise declines. You become more susceptible to illness. Your mood regulation deteriorates. Your motivation to train disappears. You are not lazy. You are systemically fatigued. Your nervous system is telling you to stop because it is trying to protect you from further damage. So where is the line? Where does productive volume end and destructive volume begin? The data suggests that for most trained individuals, somewhere between 10 and 20 direct weekly sets per muscle group is the range where growth is optimized without excessive fatigue accumulation. Pushing beyond 20 sets can yield additional gains, but the efficiency drops sharply. You are doing twice the work for 10 to 15% more growth. And you are risking the systemic fatigue that undermines your ability to sustain that volume long term. Some studies have looked at volumes exceeding 30 or even 40 sets per week per muscle group. The results are mixed. Some individuals can handle it, most cannot. And even those who can are operating at the edge of their recovery capacity with very little margin for error. Individual variation matters. Some people recover faster. Some have higher work capacities. Some respond better to higher volumes. But the principle holds across the population. There is a point where adding volume stops adding stimulus and starts adding burden. And most people training for hypertrophy are better served by finding that point and staying below it rather than constantly pushing past it in search of marginal gains. The goal is not to do the maximum amount of volume you can survive. The goal is to do the minimum amount of volume required to maximize growth while preserving your ability to recover and train consistently over months and years. That is the difference between short-term intensity and long-term progress. That is the difference between looking impressive on paper and actually building muscle over time. If your training volume has crept up over time and your gains have stalled, the answer is not more sets. The answer is smarter recovery, better management of systemic fatigue, and a willingness to step back and let the work you are already doing produce results. Sometimes the most productive thing you can do is subtract, not add. More is not better. Better is better. And better means respecting the curve, understanding the biology, and training in a way that your body can actually adapt to rather than just survive. Subscribe for more content that explains the mechanisms behind what actually works, not just what sounds impressive on a training log.